Welcome back, Wasteland Wanderers. Today's story takes us beyond the borders we know across an irradiated ocean to discover the truth about what survived on the other side of the world. We are exploring Europe's tomb kingdoms, the bunker networks that became underground nations while America tore itself apart in tribal warfare. This is a confession from someone who crossed the Atlantic and lived to tell the tale. The lore begins now. My name is Marcus Webb, former Brotherhood scribe expelled for unauthorized research, and I am writing this from the cargo hold of a smuggler's vessel somewhere in the mid-Atlantic. The water around us glows faintly green at night. The radiation counter clicks constantly. Everyone said crossing the ocean was suicide. They were wrong. Not because the journey is safe, but because what waits on the other side makes the risk look like nothing. 3 weeks ago, I left the capital Wasteland behind. My Brotherhood tabard burned to ashes in a barrel outside Rivet City. My research notes, 15 years of compiled evidence sealed in waterproof containers and strapped to my chest. The captain of this rust bucket tanker asked me why I was willing to pay every cap I had for passage east. I told him I was chasing ghosts. He laughed and said that made two of us. He did not ask again when I showed him the German Gauss rifle I had brought as proof. This rifle, hold that thought, we will come back to the rifle. I need to start at the beginning because the ending I discovered will make no sense otherwise. My expulsion from the Brotherhood was not about ideology or loyalty. It was about a question I would not stop asking. A question that began with a single name, Alistair Tenpenny. You know him if you know the capital Wasteland, the British aristocrat in his tower playing at civilization while the rest of us scraped through the ruins. 80 years old, in 2277 when I first investigated him. Born in post-war Britain around 2197. Let me repeat that. Born in Britain, crossed the Atlantic Ocean in his lifetime. The Brotherhood did not want to discuss what this meant. Elder Lyons dismissed it as irrelevant local color. Scribe Rothschild told me to focus on recoverable technology, not on speculative history, but I could not let it go. Because if one 80-year-old Englishman could cross the irradiated Atlantic carrying enough wealth to buy a pre-war tower and outfit it as a fortress, then the implications were staggering. So I started digging, quietly at first, terminal entries, pre-war shipping manifests, Enclave intelligence archives from before their collapse, every scrap of information about transatlantic contact post-war. What I found changed everything I understood about our world. Tenpenny was not unique. He was just the most visible. There was Colin Moriarty's father who came from Ireland. There were coded references in old Enclave transmissions to European vessels reaching American shores in the 2100s, trading contacts, intelligence exchanges, and always the implication that whoever was coming from Europe was not fleeing desperation. They were coming as entrepreneurs, as opportunists, as people who saw post-war America as a market, not a refuge. Think about what that means for a moment. Picture yourself standing in the ruins of Washington 200 years after the bombs fell. Tribals fighting over scraps, raiders executing people for amusement, the Enclave trying to commit genocide, and across the ocean there are people wealthy enough, organized enough to cross thousands of miles of radioactive water for profit, not survival, profit. I started examining the weapons. This is where the Brotherhood should have paid attention, but they were too focused on keeping technology out of the wrong hands to ask where the right hands got it in the first place. Pre-war, the European Commonwealth was a major arms exporter to America. German engineering specifically, Heckler & Koch manufactured weapons, Gauss rifles using magnetic coil technology that American designs could not match, the Vindicator minigun that fired 90,000 caseless rounds per minute, the PPK-12 Gauss pistol that could punch through power armor. I have handled these weapons. I have examined manufacturing dates stamped into their components, and here is what made my blood run cold. Some of them were made after the war. The German Gauss rifle I found in a raider camp near Boston. Military grade, proof marks showing Prussian manufacture. dated 2076, 1 year before the Great War, yes, but the metallurgy was fresh, no 200-year degradation. Someone had maintained this weapon in near pristine condition, or it had been preserved in controlled conditions that the American wasteland simply does not have. When I traced its components, I realized the battery technology was superior to anything the Brotherhood produces today, superior to Institute designs. We are talking about post-war research and development. If Europe preserved its industrial base, if European bunkers maintained their scientific personnel, if they continued advancing while we were thrown back into the Dark Ages, then what we call the wasteland might look like a primitive backwater to European eyes. This thought haunted me, so I went deeper into the archives, pre-war intelligence documents, Vault-Tec corporate communications, Enclave contingency plans, and I found references to something called European competitor bunker programs. Vault-Tec was not the only organization building underground survival complexes. They had competition, and that competition had advantages Vault-Tec could never match. Start with Switzerland. Before the war, Swiss civil defense law required nuclear shelter space for the entire population, 8 million people, not scattered vaults for a lucky fraction, universal coverage, subterranean cities built into alpine mountains, designed not for experiments but for actual survival, stocked with food for months, air filtration that could run for years, and this was just one country. Germany had deep geological repositories, research facilities hidden in abandoned mines and salt domes, designed to protect scientific knowledge and personnel through any disaster. Scandinavia had fjord complexes carved into granite cliffs. France had its own network of military bunkers and continuity of government facilities. The United Kingdom had multiple layers of civil defense infrastructure, and all of this was built before 2060. That date is critical. 2060 is when the Euro-Middle Eastern War ended. The resource wars that tore Europe apart fighting over oil that ran dry. The conflict that dissolved the European Commonwealth into bickering nation-states. 17 years before the Great War. 17 years is a long time when you know the end is coming. American intelligence knew about these bunkers. I found Enclave documents discussing them, assessments of European survival capabilities, probability calculations for post-war European recovery. And here is what terrified me. The Enclave concluded that European bunkers being purpose-built for nuclear war rather than social experiments would likely outperform American Vault-Tec facilities in every meaningful metric. Better engineering, more recent construction, purpose-driven design instead of experimental sadism, and most critically, a population that had already learned from the resource wars. Europeans watched their continent tear itself apart over oil. They saw limited nuclear exchanges in the Middle East in 2054. They knew what was coming, and they had nearly 2 decades to prepare properly. I found maps in the Enclave archives, detailed intelligence on European bunker networks, Switzerland's mountain fortresses marked in red, German facilities in blue, Scandinavian sites in green, British continuity bunkers in yellow, hundreds of points across the continent, not randomly scattered like American vaults, but interconnected, coordinated, designed for post-war communication and cooperation. The psychological difference is massive. American vault dwellers were isolated, experimented on, traumatized. European bunker populations would have gone underground as national survival programs, not corporate experiments. They would have maintained their identities, their governments, their command structures, their sense of purpose. I interviewed Desmond Lockhart, another British survivor, pre-war intelligence operative who became a ghoul. He confirmed what I suspected. European continuity bunkers exist. They were staffed with military personnel, government officials, scientists, people chosen for their skills and knowledge, not their ability to pay. And they were waiting for the right moment to emerge. When I asked Desmond what happened to these bunkers, he smiled in that terrible way ghouls have and said, "The great game never ended. It just moved underground." I started finding shipping manifests, encoded documents recovered from coastal facilities, records showing European vessels reaching American shores multiple times post-war, small expeditions, reconnaissance missions, assessment operations. Tenpenny was not the first. He was just the one who stayed and made a visible fortune. The others came observed, took notes, and returned home. Returned home. To what? That was the question that got me expelled from the Brotherhood, because I demanded resources to find out. I wanted long-range communication equipment, satellite analysis, expeditions to the coast to search for evidence of ongoing contact. And the Brotherhood said no. They said it did not matter, that we had enough problems in our own wasteland without worrying about Europe. But it matters. It matters because of what I found in an abandoned enclave facility near the coast, a single holotape, dated 2087, 10 years after the bombs fell. The recording was fragmentary, damaged by time and radiation, but I could make out enough. A transmission from Geneva, in French, then English. The message was brief. European Federation bunker network sealed. 140,000 souls survived. Awaiting surface conditions assessment. Long live humanity. 140,000. Organized. Coordinated. 10 years post-war. And that was just the ones in Geneva's network. If you add Swiss facilities, German repositories, Scandinavian complexes, British bunkers, French installations, the numbers become staggering. Possibly 500,000 Europeans survived in coordinated underground networks, while America tore itself apart into tribal warfare. I did the math. American Vault Tech built 122 vaults, most with populations under 1,000, most running insane experiments that killed their occupants. Perhaps 100,000 Americans survived in vaults, and most of those died or went insane from the experiments. Meanwhile, Europe put 500,000 people underground in actual survival facilities. The technology gap alone would be devastating. While we rediscovered agriculture and fought over pre-war weapons, they maintained fusion power. While we scavenged ruins, they manufactured new equipment. While we regressed to tribalism, they operated as organized governments underground. I found intercepted signals, encrypted transmissions that Brotherhood monitoring equipment picked up but could not decode. Coming from European coordinates, short bursts, high frequency, using quantum encryption protocols beyond anything we have. The Institute has the most advanced technology in America, and these signals were more sophisticated than anything they produce. That German Gauss rifle I mentioned earlier, I had it analyzed. The energy cell technology uses a battery design that stores 30% more charge than Brotherhood models. The magnetic coils are wound with materials we cannot replicate. The targeting computer contains microprocessors that would require institute-level fabrication facilities to produce. This weapon was not just preserved, it was manufactured using advanced techniques. Someone across the Atlantic has working factories, research facilities, the industrial base to produce military-grade energy weapons. While we fight over 200-year-old laser rifles, they are making new ones. If you are still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button, because what I am about to tell you next will make you understand why I had to cross the ocean, why the Brotherhood tried to stop me, and why I am probably sailing to my death. I found evidence of a plan encoded in those enclave documents, references to a 2156 event, transatlantic contact, European representatives meeting with enclave leadership, a proposal for alliance. The enclave refused. Do you know why? Because they viewed Europeans as competitors for American territory, not as fellow survivors, not as potential allies, as rivals who wanted our resources. The enclave saw what I see now, that Europe did not just survive. They organized, they built, they prepared, and they were making plans for the surface long before America was ready. I spent months analyzing European pre-war infrastructure after that discovery. The public records that survived, military assessments, economic reports, and I realized something that should have been obvious. Europe was not caught off guard by nuclear war. They saw it coming from 2052 onward, 12 years of watching the resource wars escalate, 12 years of limited nuclear exchanges in the Middle East, 12 years to build, prepare, and plan. American Vault Tech started Project Safehouse in 2054, 2 years into the resource wars. They had 23 years to build 122 vaults. Europe had that same time frame, but they started with existing civil defense infrastructure. Switzerland alone had shelter space for 8 million people before the resource wars even began. They did not need to build from scratch. They needed to upgrade what already existed. I found German research papers in old institute archives, pre-war scientific journals discussing deep underground construction techniques, projects to convert abandoned mines into long-term habitation facilities, studies on recycling air and water for decades of isolation. This was not theoretical research. These were engineering manuals for building survival arcs. The economic analysis is what convinced me this was real. Pre-war Germany had the strongest economy in Europe, advanced manufacturing, precision engineering, a scientific establishment that rivaled America's best institutions. When the resource wars started draining their oil supplies, they did not collapse. They adapted. They built energy weapons, ghost rifles that used electromagnetic propulsion instead of gunpowder, miniature fusion reactors for power, armor. They were innovating while preparing for the end. I mapped out what a European bunker network would look like if designed for actual survival rather than experiments. Command and control centers in Switzerland's mountain fortresses, manufacturing facilities in German underground complexes, agricultural facilities in Scandinavian hydroponic installations, research centers in French bunkers, military garrisons in British continuity facilities, not isolated vaults, an interconnected civilization designed to wait out the nuclear winter and re-emerge as a functioning society. The radiation patterns support this theory. I analyzed fallout maps from every source I could find: American satellites, Chinese intelligence estimates, enclave meteorological data. And here is what they show. Europe did not suffer the same saturation bombing as America or China. Most nuclear strikes in Europe targeted military installations and industrial centers. The resource wars had already destroyed much of Europe's infrastructure, so there were fewer high-value targets when the Great War started. Large areas of Europe probably remained habitable. Contaminated, yes. Dangerous, certainly, but not the uniform hellscape that covered America and China. If European bunker populations could survive underground for 50 years while radiation levels dropped, they could emerge to a damaged but livable continent. Not the blasted wasteland we inherited. I found references to something called the Alpine Confederation in decoded transmissions, the Nordic Union, the Channel Treaty. These were not pre-war organizations. The terminology was wrong. The context suggested post-war formations, political entities that European bunkers created after the bombs fell, governments in exile that never stopped governing, just moved their operations 200 meters underground and kept functioning. Think about the psychological difference. American vault dwellers who survived the experiments emerged traumatized, broken. Without leadership or organization, they formed tribes based on whoever could hold power through violence or charisma. We rebuilt from zero, but Europeans would emerge with intact command structures, trained military forces, functioning bureaucracies. They would not need to rediscover civilization. They would just bring it back to the surface. I discovered evidence that European bunkers maintained contact with each other throughout the post-war period. Radio networks, underground cable systems, even satellite communications using hardened equipment. While American survivors were isolated and alone, European bunkers were coordinating, sharing resources, trading technology, operating as a unified network rather than scattered installations. The military implications terrify me more than anything else. European armies never demobilized after the Great War. They just went underground. Entire regiments housed in bunker facilities with their equipment. Modern weapons, power armor, equivalents that German engineering had been developing, training facilities to maintain combat readiness, while America's military fractured into the Enclave and Brotherhood, splinter groups Europe preserved, organized armed forces under centralized command. I found a Vault-Tec memo discussing European bunker capacity estimates. The author concluded that if European facilities matched their pre-war civil defense standards, they could house between 400,000 and 700,000 people in hardened underground installations. The memo recommended monitoring European emergence as a potential threat to American post-war interests. That memo was dated 2068, 9 years before the bombs fell. Vault-Tec knew Europe was preparing to outlast the apocalypse. What happened to those 400,000 people? Where are they now? The math is straightforward: 200 years underground with maintained technology and resources. Population growth in controlled environments. By now, European bunker populations could number in the millions, an entire underground civilization that America never knew existed. I analyzed Tenpenny's wealth in detail. Where did it come from? He arrived in America in the 2040s with enough resources to hire mercenary teams and purchase pre-war buildings. That wealth did not come from scavenging the British wasteland. He brought it with him, which means Britain has a functioning economy, currency that holds value, markets where goods and services are exchanged. You do not get wealthy in a dead civilization. You get wealthy in a living one. Desmond Lockhart told me something that has haunted me ever since. He said the pre-war intelligence community knew the Great War was coming and made individual preparations for survival. Some tried cryogenic freezing. Others used forced evolutionary virus. Desmond chose controlled ghoulification, but he said the smartest ones, the ones with real resources, built bunkers and stocked them with everything needed to rebuild. Not just survive, rebuild. He said those people are still out there, still playing the great game, still pursuing their pre-war agendas with post-war resources. And when I asked him where they were, he pointed east, toward Europe, toward the continuity bunkers that kept running long after America's government collapsed. I found Institute surveillance data showing unidentified aircraft over the Atlantic, detected by their early warning systems but never engaged because the signatures did not match known American or Chinese technology. Stealth aircraft, reconnaissance drones, possible surveillance satellites. Someone was watching America from above. Someone with technology advanced enough to avoid detection by our best sensors. The Institute tried to make contact in 2067. I found the records buried in their classified archives. They detected those European encrypted transmissions and attempted to decode them. Failed. So they sent their own transmission in multiple languages offering technological exchange. The response came back 3 days later, a polite refusal in English. The message stated that the Institute's offer was noted but not currently of interest. The tone was not desperate, it was diplomatic, like an established power declining to trade with a minor faction. That response told me everything. European bunker networks were sophisticated enough to intercept, decode, and respond to Institute communications. They had the technology to evaluate the Institute's capabilities, and they decided America had nothing they needed. That is not the response of survivors struggling to rebuild. That is the response of a civilization that already rebuilt and found American factions lacking. I traced Chinese Gauss rifle designs and found they were reverse engineered from German exports. Before the Great War, Germany sold electromagnetic weapons technology to China, which means Germany was manufacturing these weapons at an industrial scale. Not prototype research, mass production. And if they were making Gauss rifles in factory quantities before the war, imagine what they could produce now with 200 years of advancement. The European Civil War that followed the Resource Wars ended in 2060, 17 years of preparation time before the Great War. But what if the Civil War never really ended? What if European nation-states just moved their conflicts underground? Bunker against bunker, faction against faction, a subterranean Cold War fought with preserved military forces and advanced technology while waiting for surface conditions to improve. That would explain the political entities I found referenced. The Alpine Confederation would be Switzerland and surrounding nations forming a defensive alliance. The Nordic Union would be Scandinavian bunkers coordinating against potential threats. The Channel Treaty would be British and French facilities agreeing on mutual support. These were not random shelters. They were nation-states in exile maintaining their identities and alliances 200 meters underground. I found evidence of a 2200 contact event, encrypted logs from a Coastal Brotherhood chapter that no longer exists. They reported detecting a vessel off the Atlantic shore. Large, metal hull, powered by what their instruments read as a fusion reactor. The vessel stayed offshore for 6 hours, then departed. No communication, no hostile action, just observation. The Brotherhood chapter reported it to High Command and was told to forget it ever happened. 3 years later, that chapter was dissolved and its members reassigned. Someone did not want the Brotherhood investigating European vessels. Someone with authority over Brotherhood operations. That suggests Enclave involvement, which means the Enclave knew about ongoing European contact and actively suppressed the information. Why? Because acknowledging European survival would undermine their claim to be the legitimate continuation of American government. How can you claim to govern America when a more successful civilization exists across the ocean? I discovered shipping manifests from before the war showing massive European weapons exports to America. Not just small arms, artillery, armor plating, advanced electronics. America was importing European military technology because our domestic production could not keep pace with the Chinese invasion of Alaska. We were dependent on European manufacturing even before the bombs fell. If Europe preserved those factories underground, if they maintained production capabilities, then they have been manufacturing weapons and equipment for 200 years. While we scavenge and jury-rig broken pre-war technology, they produce new equipment from functioning assembly lines. The technology gap would be insurmountable. I found a fragment of a conversation in Tenpenny's private records, recovered from his terminal after his death. A coded message to someone identified only as the London operator. The message discussed American faction strengths and weaknesses. Brotherhood technology recovery capabilities assessed as moderate. Enclave military effectiveness rated as declining. Institute scientific advancement noted as impressive but limited in scope. The message ended with recommend continued observation before surface commitment. Surface commitment, not surface return, commitment. That implies planning, strategy, an organized effort to emerge from underground at the optimal moment. And the optimal moment is when American factions have weakened each other through conflict while European forces remain fresh and coordinated underground. The moral horror of this keeps me awake at night. European leadership watched American survivors struggle through radio and satellite surveillance. They saw us fight over scraps, watched us form tribal societies, observed our slow climb back towards civilization, and they chose not to intervene, not to make contact, not to offer assistance. They let us weaken ourselves while they built strength underground. Why? Because they learned from the resource wars. They learned that nations fight over resources, that helping competitors makes you vulnerable, that the smart strategy is to wait until your rivals exhaust themselves, then emerge as the dominant power. It is the same calculation that drove the resource wars in the first place. Survival through strategic patience. I mapped potential European emergence points based on bunker locations and surface geography. The Channel Tunnel complex connecting Britain and France could house 50,000 people in its subterranean passages. Alpine fortress networks in Switzerland, Mainz, could hold 200,000 across interconnected facilities. Scandinavian fjord bunkers carved into coastal granite might house another 100,000. German deep geological sites could shelter tens of thousands more. The total capacity is staggering. And if they maintained even a fraction of pre-war technology, if they continued research and development, if they avoided the tribal regression that consumed America, then they would emerge as the most advanced human civilization on Earth. While we shoot laser muskets and ride Brahmin, they would have working vehicles, advanced weapons, functioning infrastructure. If this story has kept you listening this far and you want more of these dark confessions from the Wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores, because what I am about to tell you is why I am on this ship, why I am crossing an ocean that should kill me, why I had to see the truth with my own eyes, even if it costs me everything. I found a message, recent, dated 2276, hidden in a newly opened vault that had failed to properly seal, written in French on the wall of a secondary chamber. Someone had carved it there with a plasma cutter, ensuring it would survive. The message read, "Surface reclamation imminent. American factions assessed. Minimal resistance projected. Europa invicta. Europa invicta. Europe unconquered. Not Europe survived. Unconquered." That single word choice tells you everything about their mindset. 3 words carved into a vault wall changed everything I thought I knew about our situation. Europa invicta was not a hope, it was a declaration, a statement of intent from a civilization that never fell, only retreated. And now, they were preparing to return. I needed more evidence, physical proof beyond intercepted signals and decoded messages. So, I did something that would have gotten me killed if the Brotherhood had discovered it. I broke into an old Enclave observation post on the coast, the kind of facility that monitored oceanic activity during the war. Most of it was stripped and abandoned, but the deep storage vaults were still sealed, protected by security systems the scavengers could not bypass. I spent 2 weeks cutting through those defenses. When I finally accessed the storage terminals, what I found justified every risk. Surveillance logs spanning from 2078 to 2142, 64 years of coastal monitoring, automated systems recording every anomaly, every unidentified contact, every suspicious reading. The logs showed 17 separate instances of large vessels detected offshore, fusion reactor signatures, advanced propulsion systems, staying just beyond visual range but well within sensor detection. The Enclave had been tracking European ships for decades, watching them observe our coasts, recording their approach patterns, and doing nothing. Why nothing? Because the Enclave was dying. Each decade saw their numbers shrink, their technology degrade, their control slip away. By the 2100s, they could barely maintain their own installations, let alone challenge well-equipped vessels from across the ocean. So they watched, documented, and hoped the Europeans would not notice how weak America had become. But Europeans noticed everything. The sensor logs showed increasing frequency of visits over time. One ship every few years in the 2080s, multiple vessels annually by the 2100s, longer observation periods, closer approaches to shore. They were not just watching anymore, they were measuring, calculating, preparing detailed assessments of American capabilities. I found analysis reports attached to the logs, Enclave intelligence officers trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The reports grew more desperate over time. Early assessments suggested European vessels were survey ships from scattered survivor groups. Later reports acknowledged organized maritime capability beyond anything America possessed. The final reports, dated 2142, concluded that European forces represented a peer-level threat that the Enclave could not counter. Peer-level threat. The Enclave, with their power armor and energy weapons and vertibird aircraft, considered European forces to be equals or superiors. What does that tell you about European technological advancement? I pulled detailed sensor readings from one of the later contacts. 2138, the vessel stayed offshore for 3 days, long enough for the automated systems to compile a complete profile. Displacement suggested a ship over 100 meters long. Reactor output indicated fusion power plant comparable to pre-war naval vessels. Hull composition analysis showed advanced alloys that our sensors could not fully identify. And the electromagnetic signature suggested active, defensive systems far beyond anything in the American arsenal. That was not a survivor group cobbling together a boat from scrap. That was a military vessel from a functioning navy, operating with confidence in hostile waters, conducting reconnaissance without fear of American response, because they knew we could not stop them even if we tried. The logs included communication intercepts, encrypted transmissions between the vessel and unknown receivers to the east. The Enclave could not break the encryption, but they could analyze the signal characteristics, multi-layered quantum encoding, frequency hopping across bands that required sophisticated equipment to track, data compression rates suggesting massive information transfer. These were not simple radio messages. These were secure military communications using technology that should not exist 200 years after civilization collapsed. I compared the transmission timestamps with historical events in the Wasteland, and I found correlations that made my blood run cold. A European vessel appeared off the coast in 2077, the same year the Master began creating his super mutant army. Another vessel in 2087, when the Enclave established their oil rig headquarters. Multiple contacts in the 2230s when the Institute became active in the Kinjunki Commonwealth. Every major development in American post-war history coincided with European observation missions. They were not just watching randomly, they were monitoring our progress, tracking faction developments, assessing threats and opportunities, building a comprehensive intelligence picture of post-war America over decades of patient surveillance. The kind of long-term strategic planning that only a stable, organized civilization could maintain. I found evidence of landing parties, faint traces in the sensor logs, small craft separating from the main vessels, approaching shore under cover of night, staying for hours before returning. The Enclave never interdicted these landings, never investigated the sites. They just watched and documented, too weak to intervene, too afraid to provoke a confrontation they would lose. What were those landing parties doing? Collecting samples, meeting with contacts, placing surveillance equipment, assessing ground conditions. Maybe all of these, maybe more, but every landing represented European boots on American soil, personnel from across the ocean operating on our continent without our knowledge or consent, treating America like an open territory ripe for intelligence gathering. I cross-referenced landing sites with known locations and found something disturbing. 3 landing parties came ashore near settlements that later became trading hubs: Megaton, Rivet City, Canterbury Commons. Coincidence? Or did European intelligence identify strategic locations for future operations? Did they mark these sites as valuable targets or potential assets? One landing party spent 12 hours at a location that would later become Tenpenny Tower. 6 years before Tenpenny crossed the ocean. 6 years before he supposedly discovered the pre-war apartment building and claimed it for himself. What if Tenpenny did not discover that tower? What if he was sent there by European handlers who had already scouted it as an ideal base of operations? What if his entire presence in America was part of a larger intelligence operation? That would explain his wealth, his resources, his apparent indifference to American faction politics. He was not a refugee seeking fortune. He was an asset, a forward operating element establishing presence in American territory ahead of larger commitments. His tower was not a home. It was a listening post, an observation platform, a beachhead. I examined everything known about Tenpenny with new suspicion. His mercenary teams searching for technology, his extensive caps reserves, his network of contacts across the wasteland, his preference for isolation despite living in a social environment. all consistent with an intelligence operative maintaining cover while conducting long-term surveillance. And Moriarty, the Irishman running a bar in Megaton, perfectly positioned to gather information from travelers, to monitor local faction movements, to report on developments in the capital Wasteland. Was he another asset? Another European operative embedded in American territory? How many others might there be? How many people we assumed were Wasteland survivors could actually be European agents? The paranoia this created was overwhelming. Every foreign accent became suspect. Every well-equipped merchant could be cover for intelligence work. Every mysterious stranger might be reporting to handlers across the ocean. The Europeans had 200 years to infiltrate American survivor communities, 200 years to build networks and place assets. We would never know who was really working for whom. I found technical specifications in the Enclave files, analysis of European vessel capabilities based on sensor data. The reports estimated European ships could cross the Atlantic in 3 to 4 weeks, depending on weather and routing. That means regular contact with Europe is absolutely possible. Assets could rotate in and out. Intelligence could flow both directions. Orders could be delivered and executed within reasonable timeframes. America was not isolated. We just thought we were. European civilization maintained contact across the ocean for 2 centuries, watching us, learning about us, positioning assets among us. While we fought over pre-war ruins, they built a comprehensive understanding of our strengths, weaknesses, resources, and vulnerabilities. The strategic implications are devastating. European forces know everything about American factions, our locations, our numbers, our weapons, our leadership, our conflicts. They have detailed intelligence on the Brotherhood Enclave Institute Railroad Minutemen, every significant group in the Wasteland. We know nothing about them, not their numbers, not their capabilities, not their intentions, not even their exact locations. That is not a balance of power. That is a preparation for conquest. I found references to something called Operation Horizon Assessment in the later Enclave files, a proposal to send reconnaissance aircraft over European coordinates to gather counterintelligence. The operation was planned for 2144. It never happened, because by 2144, the Enclave no longer had the resources or personnel to mount such missions. They were collapsing, and European intelligence certainly knew it. The files contained casualty projections if European forces decided to invade America. The analysis was sobering. Against a peer-level opponent with superior intelligence, naval supremacy, and unknown technological advantages, the Enclave estimated they could hold strategic locations for 6 months at most. After that, collapse would be inevitable. The Brotherhood would last longer due to dispersed assets, but without air superiority or naval capability, they could not prevent European forces from establishing beachheads and expanding territory. Think about that. What if you are a European military planner looking at these projections from your comfortable underground command center? You see a fractured continent, weak factions fighting each other, no unified defense, no coordinated response capability, limited technology, diminished populations. From a strategic perspective, post-war America is not a threat. It is an opportunity. I started mapping what a European invasion might look like based on observed patterns. Naval forces would establish control of coastal approaches. No American faction has a functioning navy to contest them. Landing forces would secure strategic ports, Boston, New York, Washington, locations with existing infrastructure and access to inland territory. From these beachheads, they would expand systematically, not through reckless aggression, but through methodical occupation backed by superior firepower. American factions would resist, of course. The Brotherhood has power armor and energy weapons, but European forces likely have equivalent or better equipment. The Institute has synths and advanced technology, but they lack military strength and operational experience. The Minutemen have numbers and local knowledge, but no heavy weapons or coordinated command structure. None of these factions could mount effective defense against a professional military force with modern weapons and unified command. The conquest would not be quick or easy, but it would be inevitable. European forces would advance, American factions would fall back, territory would change hands, and within a generation, America would be ruled from across the ocean once again. Just like the colonial period, Europe dominating the New World, history repeating with nuclear-age technology. Here is a question that should terrify you. What if this has already started? What if those landing parties were not just reconnaissance? What if European forces have been establishing forward positions for decades? Hidden facilities along the coast, weapons caches, supply depots, sleeper agents in major settlements, everything needed for a coordinated invasion already in place, just waiting for activation orders. We would never see it coming. One day, European ships appear in force. Troops land at pre-positioned sites. Agents activate and seize key facilities. American factions scramble to respond but find themselves already outflanked and surrounded. By the time we realize we are being invaded, the invasion is already over. I examined the geopolitical situation from a European perspective. They spent 200 years underground, built a functional civilization in bunker networks, maintained their technology and culture. But they face a fundamental problem: resources. Even the best bunkers have limitations. Recycling systems degrade, equipment wears out. Populations grow and need space. Eventually, they must return to the surface. But Europe is damaged, contaminated, fought over during the resource wars and bombed during the Great War. Even if large areas remained habitable, they are still hostile environments requiring extensive cleanup and reconstruction. That takes time, resources, personnel, all of which are limited even for an advanced underground civilization. America offers an alternative: a vast continent, rich resources, existing infrastructure waiting to be reclaimed, and most importantly, a weak, divided population that cannot effectively resist organized occupation. From a strategic resource perspective, conquering America makes perfect sense. More sense than trying to rebuild Europe from scratch. If you were a European military commander with advanced technology and detailed intelligence on American factions, would you try to negotiate with the Wasteland survivors or simply take what you needed by force? What would be the moral justification either way? This is why I am on this ship, crossing the ocean, sailing toward what might be my death. Because someone needs to see the truth. Someone needs to confirm whether European bunker kingdoms really exist, whether they are really preparing to emerge, whether America faces not just wasteland threats, but invasion from across the sea. The captain says we are 3 days from the European coast. If we survive the crossing, if the radiation does not kill us, if European defenses do not destroy us, then I will finally know. I will see whether the bunkers are real, whether the cities underground actually exist, whether my 15 years of research led me to truth or madness. Part of me hopes I am wrong, that European bunkers failed like most American vaults, that Tenpenny and Desmond were just lucky survivors from a dead continent, that those sensor contacts were ghost readings or misidentified phenomena, that the messages and transmissions were elaborate hoaxes. But I know I am right. The evidence is too consistent, too detailed, too well documented. European civilizations survived. They organized. They built strength underground while we struggled on the surface. And now they are preparing to emerge and reclaim the world they left behind. The European coast appeared on the horizon 4 days ago. Not the wasteland I expected. The radiation levels dropped as we approached. The water changed from toxic green to murky gray. And then I saw them. Lights. Actual electric lights along the shoreline. Not fires. Not bioluminescence. Artificial illumination powered by working electrical infrastructure. The captain refused to go closer. He said we had fulfilled our contract. He had brought me to Europe. What I did next was my own business. He gave me a small boat, some supplies, and a radiation suit. Then, he turned his ship around and headed back toward America. I do not blame him. What we were seeing defied everything we understood about the post-war world. I rode toward those lights. Every stroke brought me closer to answers I had spent 15 years seeking. The shore was not ruined. Buildings stood intact, not crumbling pre-war structures, but maintained facilities showing signs of ongoing use. Piers extended into the water. Metal, construction, not rotted wood. This was not a dead continent. This was a living one. I landed at what appeared to be a small fishing village on the French coast. Dawn was breaking. I could see people moving between buildings, dressed in clean clothes, not raider armor or scavenged rags, actual manufactured garments. They had carts pulled by animals I did not recognize, mutated perhaps, but healthy, well-fed, domesticated. I hid the boat and approached carefully. My radiation counter was nearly silent, background levels only. This place had been cleaned, decontaminated, made safe for human habitation. The level of organization and resources required for environmental remediation on this scale was staggering. I observed the village for hours, trying to understand what I was seeing. The people spoke French. Their routines were normal, almost mundane. They fished, tended gardens, repaired equipment. Children played in streets. This was not a struggle for survival. This was ordinary life, the kind of ordinary that had not existed in America for 200 years. Then I saw the soldiers, a patrol moving through the village, 6 personnel in uniform, not cobbled together armor, actual military uniforms with insignia and rank markers, carrying weapons that looked like advanced energy rifles. Their equipment was pristine, well-maintained, standard issue from a functioning military supply system. The patrol stopped at what appeared to be a communication station, a building with antenna arrays on the roof. They checked in with someone. I could not hear the conversation, but the routine was clear. Regular patrols, established checkpoints, military presence integrated into civilian life. This village was part of a larger organized structure. I needed to get closer, learn more. But my American Wasteland appearance would stand out immediately. I looked like what I was, a scavenger from across the ocean. So I waited until nightfall and broke into an isolated building to find clothes and information. What I found inside that building changed everything. Maps, detailed maps of Europe showing territorial divisions. The Alpine Confederation controlled Switzerland and parts of Austria and northern Italy. The Nordic Union held Scandinavia. The Rhenish Federation covered Western Germany and Eastern France. The Atlantic Commonwealth included Britain, Ireland, and Western France. These were not historical nations. These were post-war political entities dividing Europe between them. The maps showed more: infrastructure networks, rail lines, roads, power distribution systems. This was not scattered survivor settlements. This was continent-spanning civilization with integrated infrastructure, the kind of development that takes generations of sustained effort and massive resource investment. I found newspapers dated within the last month, printed on actual paper with real ink. The headlines discussed trade negotiations between the Nordic Union and Rhenish Federation, infrastructure projects in the Alpine Confederation, agricultural output targets for the Atlantic Commonwealth. These were the concerns of functioning governments managing complex societies, not survivors fighting over scraps. One article discussed the Horizon program, a long-term initiative to assess and potentially reclaim territory beyond Europe. The article mentioned survey expeditions to North Africa, the Middle East, and across the Atlantic. It spoke of demographic pressure requiring territorial expansion, of younger generations wanting opportunities beyond the crowded underground cities, of debates in various parliaments about the ethics and logistics of expansion. Parliaments. They had parliaments. Democratic governments operating from bunker facilities for 2 centuries. While America descended into tribalism and dictatorship, Europeans maintained representative democracy underground. They held elections, debated policy, governed themselves through institutions that never stopped functioning. I found technical journals discussing fusion reactor efficiency improvements, agricultural papers on hydroponic yields, military publications analyzing power armor enhancements. These people had not just preserved pre-war knowledge, they had advanced it. 200 years of continuous research and development while America stagnated. The evidence was overwhelming. Europe did not just survive, they thrived, built an underground civilization that exceeded pre-war capabilities in some areas. And now they were looking outward. The Horizon program was not exploration, it was expansion. They were preparing to emerge from their bunkers and reclaim the surface world. I heard voices outside. The patrol was coming back. I gathered what documents I could carry and slipped out through a rear window. I needed to see more, needed to understand the full scope of what I had discovered. So, I followed the patrol. They led me to a lift system, a heavy industrial elevator descending into the earth. The entrance was guarded, but not heavily. 2 soldiers checking identification of people going down, workers mostly, engineers, technicians, people heading to their shifts in the underground facilities. I could not get past the guards, but I could observe. And what I saw confirmed my worst fears. Hundreds of people using that elevator, a steady flow of personnel moving between surface and subsurface. This was not a secret bunker with a few survivors. This was a major population center with thousands of inhabitants. I circled the area and found ventilation shafts, massive ducts pushing air from underground. The volume suggested enormous subterranean spaces, cities underground, just like the pre-war plans had indicated. Switzerland built shelters for 8 million people. They actually did it, and those shelters became thriving communities, maintaining civilization while the surface world burned. I found an observation point on a hillside overlooking the facility. As the sunset, I watched lights come on across the complex. Not just the surface buildings, the ground itself glowed in places. Transparent panels set into the earth allowing light to filter down to underground levels. They had built subterranean cities with artificial sunlight, gardens underground, parks, spaces for people to live full lives without ever seeing the real sky. Imagine living your entire life underground, knowing a ruined world exists above, but being told it is not safe to emerge. Then, learning your government has been secretly scouting that surface world for decades. How would you feel about your leaders, about the people suffering on the surface while you lived in comfort? Over the next 3 days, I observed multiple sites along the French coast. Every location showed the same pattern: surface villages connected to massive underground complexes, military presence, organized infrastructure, functioning society. Europe had not just survived the apocalypse, they had built a new civilization in the depths and were now ready to reclaim the surface. I documented everything: photographs using a camera I stole, detailed notes, sketches of military equipment and uniforms, evidence that would prove to the Brotherhood that European civilization existed and posed a potential threat to American survivors. But then I found something that made me question everything. A memorial, a monument on a clifftop overlooking the Atlantic, dedicated to the victims of the Great War, the names of cities destroyed, countries lost, billions dead, and at the base, an inscription in multiple languages: "We who survived must never forget those who perished. We who were spared must honor their memory by building a better world. We who emerge must do so in peace, not conquest." I sat at that memorial for hours, reading the names, the inscription, trying to reconcile it with my fears of invasion. These people mourned their dead, honored the lost, pledged to build peacefully, but they also had the Horizon program. Military patrols, reconnaissance missions to America. Which truth was real? The peaceful memorial or the strategic expansion? Maybe both. Maybe they genuinely wanted peace but recognized that emerging into a hostile world required military strength. Maybe they hoped to contact American survivors as equals but prepared for conflict in case we responded with violence. Maybe their 200 years underground taught them that survival requires both compassion and force. I made my way further inland, following railway lines that connected coastal facilities to interior regions. The trains were electric, running on schedule, carrying cargo and passengers across European territory. I rode in a freight car hidden among crates of manufactured goods. Watching the landscape pass, the devastation was real. Ruined cities, blasted forests, contaminated zones marked with warning signs. But between the dead zones were areas of recovery, reclaimed farmland, rebuilt towns, zones where decontamination efforts had succeeded and people were returning to the surface. Europe was healing, slowly, systematically, with resources and knowledge that America lacked. The train brought me to the Alps, to the heart of the Alpine Confederation, and there I saw the crown jewel of European survival, a mountain fortress that made the citadel look like a shack, massive blast doors set into the mountainside, large enough to drive vehicles through, defended by weapon emplacements that could repel an army. This was not a bunker. This was an underground nation. I could not get inside. Security was too tight. But I did not need to. I had seen enough. The European bunker kingdoms were real. They existed. They functioned. They were preparing to emerge. And when they did, the balance of power in the post-war world would shift dramatically. Standing in those mountains looking at that fortress, I realized something profound. America was not the center of the post-apocalyptic world. We were a sideshow. A continental backwater struggling through tribal conflicts while a more advanced civilization waited patiently underground for the right moment to reclaim their heritage. The question was not whether Europeans would emerge. They were already emerging. Surface villages, reclamation projects, expansion programs. The question was whether they would come to America as conquerors, partners, or something else entirely. I thought about Tenpenny, about Desmond, about all the hints and clues I had found over 15 years. They were not isolated survivors. They were the vanguard, the first wave, testing American reactions, assessing our capabilities, reporting back to their handlers about conditions in the New World. And America was failing the test. We fought each other, wasted resources on petty conflicts, failed to rebuild any semblance of unified civilization. From a European perspective, we must look like children playing in ruins, incapable of serious governance or development, ripe for supervision by more capable hands. I began my journey back to the coast, back to the boat I had hidden, back to the long, dangerous voyage across the Atlantic. I had to warn them, had to tell the Brotherhood what I had discovered, had to make them understand that our wasteland squabbles were meaningless in the face of this larger threat. But would they listen? The same Brotherhood that expelled me for asking questions? The same factions that could not cooperate long enough to rebuild a single city? What would they do with the knowledge that a superior civilization was preparing to emerge from underground and potentially claim American territory? Probably nothing. Probably dismiss it as fantasy. Probably continue their pointless conflicts while European forces finalize their plans, because that is what we do. We survive in the moment without thinking about larger forces shaping our world. I am writing this final entry from the boat. 3 weeks into the return voyage, radiation sickness is setting in. The crossing damaged me more than I realized. I may not survive to deliver this warning, but I had to try, had to document what I found, had to leave evidence for whoever comes after. If you are hearing this, if someone found my notes and shared them, then please understand. The world is larger than we imagined, more complex, more dangerous. European civilization never fell. They retreated, rebuilt, and are now ready to reclaim what they consider their rightful place in the world. Whether they come as friends or conquerors depends on how we respond. If we continue fighting each other, they will see us as primitive tribes needing supervision. If we unite and rebuild, they might treat us as equals. The choice is ours, but the time to choose is running out. The lights of Europe still haunt my dreams. The evidence that humanity survived and prospered while we suffered. The knowledge that we are not alone in this ruined world, that somewhere across the ocean, millions of people live in comfort and security, planning their return to a surface they never abandoned. only postponed. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It is the only way I know you liked the video. Because this might be the most important information to reach the American wasteland in 2 centuries, and it deserves to be heard. Europa Invicta, Europe unconquered. They survived. They built. They are